TEDx nerves. I cut myself shaving. Only the second time in my life I've done that. And I was going to put some concealer on there. The ladies backstage offered it to me and I said, no, this is perfect. I'm going to start off my talk by talking about a guy you all know who was famous for a scar on his face, Harry Potter. Now, what's so beguiling and bewitching about his story? And why does it connect with the topic that I'm going to talk about today? So Harry Potter lives a boring and ordinary life in the suburbs, a life without meaning and purpose, and he gets whisked away into the mountains to a Hogwarts, a training school where he gets taught in the dark arts. He gets to wear an invisibility cloak. He gets to wave a wand or a machine gun, which is almost as powerful. This transformation from a life of purposelessness and aimlessness to one of purpose and power is a very deep human story, and it's one of the reasons why those books did so extraordinarily well. But one of the things I want to talk about is that Harry had the good fortune to be given the task, the clear task, to fight evil. Now, I'm not really an expert on the psychology of terrorism or terrorists. I'm actually a psychologist specialising in change, or really the unchanging. You probably think about psychologists, particularly clinical psychologists, as people who are like, witches over a cauldron trying to work out the recipe in order to enact the kind of change that they want to magically make. Politicians are in the same boat. You probably think of them as pulling puppet strings to try and make change in society, change you don't necessarily want. But the reality is very, very different. Politicians and psychologists are probably a little bit more like a movie you've seen on a runaway truck where we're pulling at the wheels and pulling at the levers and nothing's happening the way we want. We call these things as scientists wicked problems, problems that are intransigent, difficult to change, difficult to shift, complex. You may have heard me say wicked problems, and in a sense you're right, because wicked problems are the problems that we put in the too hard basket, and also wicked in the sense that they are all entwined with each other and enmeshed and difficult to disentangle. Now, in this talk, I am going to be a little bit like Tom Cruise. A little bit like Tom Cruise, a little taller, as you may be able to see, and significantly less handsome. But like Tom Cruise in Minority Report, I'm going to wave my arms around and predict future crime. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, Tom has access to this swimming pool full of clairvoyance. And I suspect the swimming pool's got 50% chloroform in it because these clairvoyants sleep, dream, and predict crime. Now, I don't have access to that swimming pool, but I do have access to an extraordinary pool of data called the Global Terrorism Database, University of Washington, or University of Maryland in Washington. And I've spent months sifting through the data, which names and in great detail, down to the last bullet and the last bomb, every incident that's taken place around the world, extraordinary number, 85,000 incidents of terror all around the world. 5 decades of data. Now, I'm going to give you this complicated formula that will enable us, rather disturbingly and with great accuracy, to predict where the next terror incident is going to occur in the world. And considering those 80,000 incidents are spread all around the world, and the 10,000 odd incidents per year, you cannot technically predict where they are, but we are if you examine the data carefully enough. Now, the very next terror incident, let's say a current incident during today's talk takes place in Belgium. In fact, we can say with fair degree of safety that around 8 incidents around the world will take place during today's presentations. Now, let's say the first incident happens in Belgium. We'll call this the anchor attack. The very next terror incident will take place wherever the previous terror incident took place. In fact, we can say with over a third accuracy, 38.4% chance that wherever terror happened, it will happen again. Within 24 hours, that number goes up to 59%. Within 1 week, it goes up to 87%. Wherever terror has happened, it will happen again, almost certainly, and soon. Now, this particular formula hasn't changed over the 5 decades we've been collecting data on terror. But any of you who've even a passing interest from watching television or reading newspapers online, you'll know that something fundamentally has changed. Now, I'm going to put this back to you just for a moment. I'm going to do something psychologists love to do, a bit of word association. I'm going to put a word up on the screen, and I want you to work out, say it to yourself, otherwise it'd get a bit noisy in here, but say to yourself the where and the who of the following word. Hold that thought. Now, where and who? I wouldn't be surprised if some of you came up with Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Iraq, and Syria. Let's wind back the clock, though, to 1970, when this database was first created. 653 incidents took place around the world that year. A fair sample. To the nearest dozen, how many do you think took place in this set of countries? The answer is actually 0. 0 incidents, 1970. How many incidents do you think were attributed to Muslim terrorist groups or Islamic terror in the year 1970? You're probably guessing accurately 0. 1971, 0. 1972, 0. So something fundamentally has changed in the nature of terror. And I won't have time in the time I'm talking today to completely answer it, and it is complex. It's a true wicked problem. But what I've done, I've gone through the database and assembled a series of maps which I'm going to show to you. And I broke the data down into nations and number of attacks. And I created a pop chart, and I focused on the number 1 on the charts and the number 2 on the charts. And the results come up on the screen behind me. Now, there's a few things that are similar to the pop music charts about the terror charts. One is that a country rarely comes back into the top of the charts once it's had its time at the top. But unlike the pop music charts, a country rarely appears from nowhere. It rarely rockets up the charts with a bullet, so to speak. You can generally see terror coming. And you can see it coming on this individual basis, and you can see it as when we talked about Belgium, for example, and you can also see it coming on this national basis. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could predict the who of terror to the same degree that we are able to predict with great degree of accuracy the where of terror? Because then we really could be like Tom Cruise. We really could go out and put handcuffs on perpetrators and stop crime before it happened, just like in Minority Report. The reality is that the who of terror is way more obscure and difficult to predict than the where and the when of terror. The when, we know it's going to happen soon. Today, it's going to happen. This afternoon, it's going to happen. The who, we don't know. Now, we often think about terror, if you've stopped to think about it, as a man's activity. And it is. It's run by young men. And young men suffer from insufferable egos. And to some degree, terror, if you want to psychoanalyze it, is partly an issue of ego. But the reality is, if you look at the numbers, fully 45%, not that far short of half of terror incidents are never claimed. In other words, the incident takes place and no one takes responsibility. Now, I've come to a part of my talk where if I was in your shoes, I'd become extremely uncomfortable because I'm going to do something that I hate when it happens to me. I'm going to do audience participation. It's one of the reasons I avoid Turkish restaurants like the plague, because there's always a chance of a belly dancer appearing. It just makes me nervous talking about it. I like Turkish otherwise. What I want you to do is, we're in a darkened theatre here. I want you to imagine you're in a nightclub. And if there's someone nearby and you feel comfortable with it, I'd like you in a minute to put your hand on their shoulder and close your eyes. Or on the head is fine as well. But I'd like you to do this and give them a gentle shove. Give them a push. Try it. Now, if you did it, or if you imagine it in your head, eyes closed, dark, you receive a shove, or hopefully you received one as well as gave one. It's good to receive as well as to give. That feeling that you felt, even though this happened in a sort of staged activity, there is something deep inside us that moves when we are pushed. Imagine you're in that nightclub and someone pushes you, and you know it's deliberate, and you turn around and you look who did it. Who done it? You see they are, and your first instinct, regardless, is to push back. It's a natural. Revenge is the most natural, perfect, and symmetrical form of justice that human beings know. No punishment, as I say, quite fits like the crime, like a perfect copy of the crime itself. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, shove for a shove. But part of the reason we do revenge is because we believe that revenge works. We believe it's not just about restoring the equilibrium emotionally of the situation. We've been attacked, we've been destabilised. Let's destabilise the other person, push back. It's not just about this sort of spirit level, trying to restore it and balance it up again. It's also because we believe, and terrorists believe, this was Osama bin Laden a couple of years before, he said these exact words, nothing will stop you except retaliation in kind. He was thinking eye for an eye too. And when George Bush responded to 9/11, he was thinking it as well. We all think this. We think it works. Now, when we engage in acts of real war, as opposed to the war on terror, we tend to declare them. Winston Churchill's famous speech, George Bush, when he declared the war on terror, he did it officially. It's on. But as we found, 45% of cases in the war of terror are undeclared. And what I wanted to do was actually have a look at the difference between nations where war was declared and where war was left undeclared. No one claimed responsibility. And I, with the help of a statistician called Pete Stevenson from the United States, I worked my way through the data, and we manipulated a number of ways, but each time we came up with the same answer. When war is undeclared, when the bombs take place and the terrorist incidents occur and no one claims responsibility, versus when someone claims responsibility and we know who to hit back. The difference between this dancing in the dark and knowing who to hit back, as you can see, is huge. Over the following years, the escalation in terror that occurred in cases where we knew who done it were really quite graphic. Now, we have this instinct to think that justice works in a certain way. When we introduce, for example, the death penalty, we don't do it just to satisfy some sort of bloodlust that we have and channel it through civilised channels. We also introduce the death penalty because we think it works. It might reduce murder. Similarly, but if you look at the data, you get this very disturbing pattern, which I've had a look. When you introduce the death penalty, murder rates tend to go up as often as not, and when you repeal the death penalty, capital punishment, murder rates go down. It doesn't make sense. What my data shows in relation to terror, as well as the other data in other fields, shows that hitting back doesn't do what we think it should do instinctively. The war on terror doesn't work. The war on drugs doesn't work. You probably even noticed that the war on your children picking up their dirty laundry doesn't work. So what should we do? Now, I talked a little bit earlier about the Harry Potter feeling of being in a terror group. And, you know, the truth is that feeling is a great cosy feeling. It's a feeling of belonging to a group, a feeling of love, of mates, friends, family. But it's also a feeling of the joy of having a clearly defined enemy. The reality is what the war on terror does is two terrible things. First of all, it physically isolates the terrorists from the rest of the community, fences them off, sends them to Hogwarts. And secondly, it provides them with a pre-packaged, perfect, off-the-shelf enemy. The war on terror is like the perfect team-building exercise for terrorists, inadvertently. So, if what we're doing now isn't working, what is it that we should do? It's a question I bet you're asking me in your heads. You're thinking, what should we do then? And notice how easily that question comes. Because humans are a particular kind of species. We're action men, we're action women. We believe that when something happens, we should take control. We love control. We should do. However, the evidence that I've shown shows that this kind of addiction to doing may be the opposite of effective if the aim of the war on terror is not to restore a sense of justice, not to restore that good feeling that now finally we've hit back. But if the war on terror is aimed at actually winning, then doing nothing at all, the data shows, is probably 1, 2, or even 3 times as effective. Thank you.